Hey, welcome to a new video. Our world is vast, with countless places to hide or get lost for days. But there's also been people who found themselves in the most unimaginable situations. Are you new to this channel? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And before we start, also like the video. Think of the strangest thing you could wake up to, and you won't come close to what Ruth Hamilton experienced one October morning in her British Columbia home. First, her dog barked, then an explosion followed, and when she opened her eyes, she saw pieces of drywall falling on top of her. When she called emergency services, she saw a large stone on her pillows, as big as the hole in her ceiling. A meteorite from space had fallen next to her on the bed. 10 years before Scott Castle came face to face with the giant Humboldt squid, he had dedicated his life to studying and protecting all kinds of ocean creatures. In the village where he lived, the inhabitants called this squid the Red Demon. During one of his expeditions, Scott found himself in a threatening situation where he was attacked by a giant Humboldt squid. Squids don't make sounds, but Scott remembers the sound of the thousands of teeth of the squid. The squid rushed past him, became very aggressive, and wrapped its 10-meter-long tentacles around his arms and legs. Despite the squid's strength, Scott managed to fight back and free himself from its grip. He then quickly surfaced where his team was waiting for him. Fortunately, he was able to escape the attack relatively unscathed. On Saturday morning, an anonymous 91-year-old woman asked her local bank in Western France for access to her personal safe deposit box. The usual procedure led to an employee accidentally locking her in it. The clerk had somehow forgotten about the woman. The elderly woman had no phone and no way to call for help until the bank reopened Tuesday morning. Fortunately, her son noticed she had not come home, and on Sunday morning, police found her sitting in the dark vault. In 1993, Emile Larrey left for the Sahara aboard a Citroën 2CV. These are widely used vehicles in North Africa that allow you to drive around the desert for a long time. But the brave Larrey went to extremes when he took another route. He accidentally bumped into a rock that damaged the chassis of his car, causing his engine to fail. He couldn't walk back because the city was too far away. But after a night's sleep, the next day, he decided to build a motorcycle out of the broken parts. He used the hood as a shelter while he was in the desert. After 12 days of work, he successfully built a motorcycle out of the tools and parts. So he managed to get out of the desert safely, and later received an award for his incredible achievement. In 1984, a team of French mountaineers climbed the Statue of Liberty in New York using suction cups and ropes as part of a publicity stunt. However, it's illegal to climb the statue, but Therese Okomu, who we're going to be talking about, was not the first person to attempt it. Although few have succeeded in the past century, the statue is approximately 305 feet or 93 meters tall from the base to the top of the torch. So, on July 4th, 2018, a woman named Therese climbed the Statue of Liberty to protest against the Trump administration immigration policy, particularly the separation of families at the US-Mexico border. She sat at the foot of the statue for over 3 hours, causing the evacuation of Liberty Island. Eventually, the woman was arrested by police and charged with 3 federal misdemeanors. Her climb sparked mixed reactions from the public, with some praising her as a hero, while others criticizing her for putting herself and others in danger. One morning, Steve BRUEMMER was swimming at Lovers Point Beach in Monterey, California, when a great white shark pulled him underwater out of nowhere. Surprisingly, the shark spat him out and stared at him in confusion. The shark probably thought Steve was a seal and got a shock when it tasted a human. Fortunately, Steve survived. Ben Nyambi is a Kenyan conservationist who has dedicated his life to protecting the nature in the country. However, his passion for conservation almost cost him his life when he was attacked by a huge python. While he was working on his farm, he accidentally stepped on a python that was 4 meters long. According to the story, the python coiled around his body and then dragged him up a tree. Despite Ben's efforts to break free, the snake continued to cling to him, but he eventually managed to break free and ran to the nearby village where he called for help. However, the incident did not deter Ben from his mission to work with wild animals and snakes. He continues to advocate for their conservation and their importance in the ecosystem. This is probably the longest cigarette break in history. That of 34-year-old Nicholas White, who was working late Friday night in New York. When he returned to his office on the 39th floor, the elevator came to a screeching halt, trapping him for a total of 41 hours. All he had with him were cigarettes. He had no water, no food, and no phone. He also did not know when it was day or night. As we see on the surveillance footage, he was pacing and panicking because of his claustrophobia. He was only discovered 2 days later. Poon Lim is the record holder who survived the longest on a raft at sea. His story dates from 1942, when the ship he was in was sunk by a torpedo. There were 55 crew members on board, of which 11 were rescued by other ships. Poon grabbed the nearest life jacket and continued swimming for about 2 hours until he saw a floating wooden raft and he sat on it. Luckily for him, the raft contained dried cookies, 10 gallons or 40 liters of water, chocolates, and some electric torches. But he knew his supplies wouldn't last long, so he applied his survival skills and caught rainwater with a cloth. He made small fish hooks from threads on the stove and a knife from the cookie tin. He floated in the South Atlantic Ocean for 133 days until 3 fishermen found his raft and rescued him. The story of Stephen Kubacki will keep you up at night. In 1978, Stephen was a student at Hope College when he disappeared during a cross-country skiing trip in Saugatucket, Michigan. Stephen was an experienced skier and planned to be away for just a few days, but he never returned home. The search for him began promptly but was called off after a week when no trace of him was found. After 3 months, a fisherman discovered a pair of cross-country skis and a backpack floating on Lake Michigan, near where Stephen was last seen. Authorities believed he had fallen through the ice and drowned, with his body being swept away by the lake's undertow. However, the mystery started to unravel in May 1979, when he was found lying in the grass in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, about 621 miles or 1,000 kilometers away from where he disappeared. He had no memory of the preceding 15 months, and his last recollection was of the shore of Lake Michigan, where he had left his footprints in the snow. Stephen was found wearing strange clothing and carrying a backpack full of maps. There's many theories about the man's disappearance and return, with some suggesting he suffered from amnesia, while others believe he was abducted by extraterrestrial beings. Some people have speculated that Stephen's experience may be related to the Bermuda Triangle, a mysterious area in the Atlantic Ocean where ships and planes have vanished without a trace. Falling from 10,000 feet into the Peruvian rainforest is not an ideal Christmas present for anyone. But that was the reality for Juliana Kopk in 1971. She woke up in the rainforest at one point, and her memories came back in a haze. She had been on a plane with her mother that had crashed, and Juliana had miraculously survived. However, luck had nothing to do with her survival, as she had grown up in the same jungle. She survived deadly animals, insects, and exposure for days, until she finally encountered a group of fishermen who rescued her. Otters may be cute and all, but when it comes down to it, the official advice is to stay far away from them. 77-year-old Sue Spector was kayaking along the Waikiki River in Central Florida, when an otter suddenly jumped into her kayak and attacked her. The otter used all of the techniques it knew, biting, scratching, and clawing, but Sue managed to defend herself with a paddle. On land, humans may be at the top of the hierarchy, but our importance dramatically decreases when we enter the territory of animals. If she didn't have her paddle, she probably wouldn't have survived. Sue was rushed to the hospital where she needed multiple stitches, and she also suffered a number of scars on her arms, legs, and face. It's a pretty terrifying thought that anyone can get stuck in the street like this. This teenage girl's slip in Zunyi City in China led to the fire department getting involved. The space between the 2 steel beams in which her leg was stuck was only about 3 inches or 8 centimeters wide. Firefighters ended up having to cut open the bars and do their best to protect her from the sparks. The Croatian man, Frane Selak, is both the happiest and the unhappiest man alive. Almost like a cat, he seems to have 7 lives. In 1962, he was aboard a train that was derailed and crashed into an ice-cold river. Frane, however, managed to survive this. The next year, he had his first and only plane ride when suddenly the plane's door was blown out. He fell out of the plane and miraculously landed on a haystack. 3 years later, the bus he was in skidded off the road into a river. Then in 1970, his car caught fire. In 1995, he was hit by a bus, and a year later, his car crashed into a 90-meter deep ravine after avoiding a truck. He was rescued after clinging to a tree. But the good thing was that Frayne won the lottery in 2003, with a total of $825,000 or 700,000 euros. What a lucky guy. Imagine this. You're taking a hike in a forest reserve, enjoying the rugged beauty of nature surrounding you. You take a wrong turn and suddenly find yourself lost without food, water, or cell phone signal. The forest is vast, and you're at the mercy of the unforgiving terrain. This was the exact situation for Amanda Eller, a yoga instructor from Hawaii. For 17 grueling days, Amanda had to rely on her instincts, faith, and resilience to survive in the Makawa Forest Reserve. During the ordeal, helicopters hovered over the forest, but they couldn't spot her due to the dense canopy of trees and vegetation. Amanda had to fend for herself, completely alone in the wilderness. As she walked through the forest, she felt a voice guiding her, telling her which paths to take and which ones to avoid. She trusted this voice and kept walking, even when it seemed like she was going deeper into the woods. And eventually, after 17 long days, Amanda was found alive, next to a waterfall in the forest and near a cliff. She later described her experience, which ended with a broken leg, as spiritual. If you were stranded, would you also listen to the voice in your head if it told you where to go? This next moment is about a Ukrainian soldier who owes his life to an iPhone 11. The soldier was on patrol when he and his fellow soldiers were ambushed by enemy troops. During the firefight, the soldier was hit in the chest by a bullet. Fortunately, the bullet was stopped by his iPhone 11, which was in his breast pocket. When he was taken to a nearby hospital, it was said that the bullet was stopped by the phone's metal frame and hardened glass screen. He's pretty lucky, huh? In 1997, Mike Coots was surfing off the coast of Hawaii when a great white shark bit his right leg and dragged him underwater. Despite the bite, he remained calm and managed to fight back. He punched the shark in the nose, causing it to release him. Mike lost his leg in the incident, but decided to keep surfing. Another story comes from a man named Todd Endress, who was surfing off the coast of California in 2007 when a 4.5-meter-long great white shark approached him. However, a school of dolphins came to his aid, acting as a barrier between him and the shark. Todd survived the incident and had the courage to keep surfing and overcome his fears. Would you still surf if this happened to you? Let me know in the comments. This is probably every amusement park visitor's worst nightmare: getting stuck in an attraction. Worse than that is being stuck upside down. More than 60 people on the flying dinosaur ride at Japan's Universal Studios wish they had not entered the attraction that day. In fact, they were stuck for 2 hours, and the distance from the ground was about 88 feet, or 27 meters. When Matt Sutter was 19 years old, he watched the news on television when he heard loud noises outside. As he looked through the window of the caravan, which he shared with his grandmother and uncle, he realized that a tornado was coming towards him. He tried to close one of the windows when the tornado sucked him out. A big glass lamp landed on his head and left him unconscious while he was spinning around inside of the tornado. According to a meteorologist, Matt's unconsciousness may have helped him survive the tornado when he went with the current and avoided other debris. He eventually woke up in a lawn about 1,300 feet or 398 meters from the caravan. This gave Matt the record for the longest distance to be blown away by a tornado. No cell phone signal, no sense of direction, and no way to get help. It's a terrifying situation, especially for someone of Peter's age. He was 75 years old when he went missing during a walk in Brancaster, Norfolk. Fortunately, he was found alive and well 24 hours later, thanks to modern technology. The use of a drone by the Norfolk police played a crucial role in locating Peter. The police deployed a drone to search the marshes in the area, and when they found him, they were able to guide the rescue team to his location. Despite the potential for a tragic outcome, the actions of the police drones led to a positive ending. Hiromitsu Shinkawa was a man who survived the impossible after a tsunami destroyed his town and he ended up sitting on the floating roof of his own house. The 60-year-old resident of Fukushima, Japan saw the tsunami wave coming and decided to run to get his belongings. One thing led to another, and he decided to hold on to the floating roof. Eventually, the man was found by a boat miles out into the ocean after he caught their attention by waving a red flag. Winder Cyanine is a farmer from Zambia who had a remarkable experience surviving both an elephant and a crocodile attack. In 2018, he was working on his farm when a herd of 5 elephants attacked him. To avoid being trampled, he jumped into the river. He thought he was safe, but at one point he felt a sharp pain in his leg, and when he looked down, he saw the eyes of a crocodile staring back at him. However, he miraculously managed to break free and survive the attack. It's crucial to respect nature and take necessary precautions to avoid dangerous encounters. He also believes that God helped him in a mysterious way, as surviving an encounter between these two animals is not something that normally happens. Being stuck somewhere on land is already terrifying, but in an underwater cave? That's definitely every swimmer's worst nightmare. Cisco Gracia, a geology teacher, was exploring the Sapaquita cave system with a friend when they got lost. With a dwindling oxygen supply, he sent the friend for help and found a small pocket of air to breathe. However, it was mostly oxygen with a high carbon dioxide content. He spent 60 hours in the air pocket and was eventually rescued. When Austin Bohannon was 18 years old, he took a walk with his stepfather in Great Smoky Mountains National Park when they were suddenly separated. His stepfather managed to get out of the forest, but Austin couldn't find his way back. When they separated, Austin climbed to the top of a ridge and tried to scream for help, but unfortunately, his calls were not heard. He had to spend the night at the top of the mountain. According to him, he also heard a helicopter passing by and tried to attract his attention. But through the dense forest, he wasn't noticed. More than 100 people were called to help find him. On the 11th day, Austin luckily managed to walk out of the forest himself, and he had survived by drinking only water. The spillway at Longhorn Dam in Austin, Texas is an impressive 36 feet or 11 meters high and 2,231 feet or 680 meters long. It's designed to safely divert excess water from the city in case of heavy rainfall. However, it's not intended for rescuing people hanging over the edge. Prior to this incident, there have been other cases of boats dangerously approaching the spillway, prompting calls for improved safety measures. On June 10, 2021, a group of water sports enthusiasts were rescued from a fall over the dam's edge. The terrifying incident occurred when the group's boat approached the spillway and became stuck in the current, prompting the passengers to call for help. Fortunately, responders quickly arrived at the scene to initiate the rescue operation. The water sports enthusiasts were visibly shaken, but thankfully all emerged unharmed. The last thing you want to experience is stepping on a nest of stinging red ants, but a woman named Joanne Murray wouldn't have survived a parachute incident if these pesky insects weren't there. She fell 14,000 feet, or 4,400 meters, and landed on a pile of red ants. The hill may have broken her fall, but the ants rushing over her body, stinging her hundreds of times, kept her adrenaline going. She remained in a coma for 2 weeks, but survived. Ben Koshrin is an experienced nature photographer who has spent most of his life exploring the wilderness of Manitoba in northern Canada. On April 17, 1922, he was camping in the remote woods when he heard the unmistakable sound of a wolf pack in the distance. Despite his years of experience, he knew he was in a potentially dangerous situation and began to prepare himself. Minutes later, he was surrounded by a pack of snarling wolves and was able to defend himself with a rifle despite being cornered. However, Ben did not give up and used all his strength and endurance to fight back. After what seemed like an eternity, the wolves finally retreated. Ben then found his way back to civilization and was rushed to the hospital, where he was treated. Here you have the story of a prisoner's escape. He, along with 4 other prisoners, had planned to escape from their cell through a hole in the wall made with a metal shower pipe. The first man got through just fine, but when Rafael Valletta tried to pass series, he got stuck halfway through. His screams alerted the guards, and the escape attempt was foiled for the rest of them. Anna Bagenholm went skiing with 2 friends in the mountains outside Narvik, Norway on the evening of May 20th, 1999. On the way down, she lost control of her skis and fell on a 50-inch or 20-centimeter layer of ice. She was dragged under it, and when her friends found her, only her feet and skis were above the ice. Luckily, Anna found an air pocket underneath her and used it to stay conscious. But it took about 80 minutes before the rescuers arrived. At that moment, Anna had fainted and had body temperatures of 56.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 13.7 degrees Celsius. When she arrived at the hospital, her heart stopped pumping. But the doctors hoped that her brain could still respond, so they attached her to a pulmonary heart device. After 24 hours, her heart started up again, and after 12 days, Anna regained consciousness. In 2004, a tsunami in the Indian Ocean caused the third largest earthquake ever recorded. The tsunami traveled at speeds of up to 500 miles per hour, or 805 kilometers per hour, and reached heights of up to 100 feet, or 30 meters. And there, on the beach, stood an 8-year-old boy named Martunas. He was separated from his family and swept away by the waves. For days, Martunas was lost and alone, surviving on nothing but rainwater and dried noodles. He spent those days crying and barely holding on. But miraculously, he was found by a group of soldiers searching for survivors. They brought him to a hospital where he was treated for dehydration. He was later taken in by the national football team of Portugal. He wore a football jersey with the number 7, the same number superstar Cristiano Ronaldo wore when he was found. Later, he had the opportunity to meet Ronaldo in person, who was touched by his story and gave him a signed jersey. How far would you go to survive? For 3 months, Canadian athlete Marco Lavoie was stranded in the wilderness near the Nottoway River in West Quebec, Canada. A bear had destroyed his boat, leaving him and his German Shepherd stuck in the middle of nowhere. He was starving and eventually did the unthinkable. He ate his dog. After being rescued a week later, he faced criticism for his desperate act. What would you have done in this situation? Let me know in the comments. This is why you shouldn't have wild animals as pets, no matter how cute they may be. It always ends in tragedy, on both sides. For years, Travis the chimpanzee was a local celebrity in his Connecticut town. His family, Sandra and Jerome Harold, treated him like a child, dressing and feeding him, and even taking him to their workplace. After Jerome passed away, the chimpanzee had erratic and wild moments, running away from home to roam the streets. On a fateful day, the chimpanzee escaped and attacked a woman. She called 911, and it took several minutes for authorities to arrive. The woman survived, but was left with numerous disfigurements and blindness in her face. Years later, she became an advocate for animal welfare and worked to raise awareness about the dangers of keeping wild animals as pets. Not only Santa fits down the chimney. In 2014, a California woman was arrested when she got stuck halfway down the chimney of the man she was dating. At the time, they had met online and only had 6 dates. What she hoped to accomplish went awry when she had to call emergency services on herself. The fire department had to break open the chimney with a jackhammer, and the rescue took 2 hours. I don't think there's a 7th date after that. In 2016, 3 men boarded a 5.8-meter-long rowing boat, also known as a skiff. But along the way, in the middle of the sea, their boat was overturned by the rough weather and ended up on the sand of an island called PHINEAS, hundreds of kilometers north of Papua New Guinea. They spent 3 days on the island until an American naval plane saw the big letters HELP written on the palm leaves lying on the sand. A local boat was sent to pick them up, and the rescuers immediately informed their families. After they were reported missing days ago, 2 large cargo ships searched for them together for 17 hours, and a naval plane was sent out. According to the pilots, the island was first spotted because of the fire the men had started. Without that, the rescue workers would not even know the island was there. The Bella in the Wych Elm is a mysterious incident that took place in 1943 in England and remains unsolved to this day. In April of that same year, 4 boys were wandering in Hagley Woods near Stourbridge when they discovered human remains inside the hollow of a wych elm tree. The body was in a crouched position, and all that remained were bones and some pieces of clothing. The lack of any identification raised suspicion, and an investigation began immediately. The incident became known as Bella in the Wych Elm because of an intriguing graffiti message found nearby, which read, "Who put Bella in the Wych Elm?" The graffiti fueled the mystery surrounding the case, but the identity of the victim remained unknown. Theories and hypotheses emerged, ranging from espionage to witchcraft. One theory suggested that Bella was a German spy who had parachuted into England and was later found and killed by British resistance. Others believe that the victim was a local prostitute who was murdered by one of her clients. However, none of these theories have been proven, and the case remains unsolved. 42-year-old cameraman Michael Benson was filming these volcanoes in Hawaii with a pilot when they ran into trouble and crashed into a boiling volcano. Fortunately, they landed on a ledge and were quickly rescued when another helicopter spotted them. With no other way to rescue him, they lowered a basket into the volcano's opening and retrieved him that way. Have you ever wondered what the mouth and insides of a hippopotamus smell like? Paul Templar can answer that. He said it smelled like rotten eggs. Filling in for a colleague who had contracted malaria, Paul was working as a tour guide on Zambezi River in Zimbabwe when a massive hippopotamus torpedoed through the water and dragged him in. Despite the size and power of the hippopotamus, Paul refused to give up. He fought back with all his might, punching and kicking the face and eyes of the hippopotamus in an attempt to escape. After several minutes of intense struggle, the hippopotamus finally let him go and swam away. Friends came to his aid and rushed him to the hospital. Fortunately, Paul was able to survive and tell the tale of this incident, because hippopotamus are some of the most dangerous animals on land. Blake and Neil Stanfield were on a nature excursion down the Keokuk River in Alaska when, out of nowhere, the water they were rafting through turned icy cold. They ended up in the depths, and when they tried to get out, a layer of ice covered the surface. Between the water and the ice, they could breathe little oxygen. The current dragged them violently, and according to Blake, time stood still for them. They eventually managed to get out, and he left his father to find help. It took 5 days without food before the helicopter rescue came. Victoria Cilliers was on her way to doom when she was parachuting over Salisbury Plain, and both her main chute and her reserve had failed her. She was a qualified freefall instructor who had made 2,600 successful jumps, so she was surprised when her parachute became uncontrollable. It appeared that her husband, an army sergeant, had tampered with her parachute and removed certain parts. Unfortunately, she didn't get off unscathed, but still managed to survive the fall. Her husband came up with this crazy idea because their marriage wasn't going so well. He also opened a gas tap a month earlier that could have also gone wrong. In the end, the man was sentenced to life imprisonment. Victoria told her story at several talk shows and eventually wrote her own book about it. Babu had embarked on a solo trek in an attempt to reach the summit of Karambuchi Peak in Malampuza, Kerala. While climbing a steep and narrow crevice, he slipped and fell into a ravine, where he became trapped. For over 24 hours, Babu was stuck in the ravine without food or water. He sustained injuries to his leg and arm and was in urgent need of help. Babu's ordeal was exacerbated by the extreme weather conditions in the area, with temperatures dropping to as low as 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. He was also exposed to rain and strong winds, making his situation even more perilous. A rescue operation was initiated with the assistance of local authorities and the Indian Army. The rescue team faced numerous challenges due to the difficult terrain and tight space in which Babu was trapped. They worked for hours and eventually succeeded in rescuing the boy, after which he was taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. Of all the couples who should just get married because of their amazing story, Dylan Corliss and Lexi Varga are the best. As they walked hand in hand to get burgers, they suddenly fell to the ground. A panicked passerby told them they had been struck by lightning. They both survived because, according to their doctor, their intertwined hands spread the electric current, allowing it to pass through them. Gene Moe was a seasoned Alaska bush pilot who had spent much of his life exploring the wilderness of Alaska. In 1999, he was on a solo hunting trip when he encountered a massive Kodiak bear. Despite years of experience and knowledge, Gene was overwhelmed by the bear and fought back. The bear tackled him, and from that point on, it was a struggle that Gene miraculously won. He was lucky to have a knife on him, and that the bear decided to retreat. Gene eventually got up and fled the area. He then managed to get himself to safety and seek medical help for his injuries. The incident drew attention to the dangers of hunting in Alaska and the unpredictability of bears. All of the ways a thief can be caught, there aren't many where people would laugh outright. 32-year-old Sean learned a valuable lesson when he tried to break into a Bayshore dentist's office when he got stuck in the air conditioning. For 3 hours, he was stuck. The thief claimed he was looking for his cat, Sparkles, instead of trying to break in. Do you believe that? Roy Sullivan, a park ranger in Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, has the Guinness World Record for the person who has been hit the most often by lightning. He was hit 7 times between 1942 and 1977, which was a 1 in 700,000 chance at that time. This earned him the nickname Human Lightning Rod. His first documented hit was in 1942, when he was hiding in a watchtower during a thunderstorm. He was hit when he decided to run outside. Then in 1969, he was hit while driving his truck. The metal body of his car had to protect him, but for some reason, the electricity found its way to his window. A year later, he was hit in his front yard, and the other hits happened in 1972, 1973, 1976, and 77. Roy managed to survive all these events and eventually became 71 years old. Gabriel Nagy was a man from Newcastle, Australia, who disappeared on January 21, 1987, and his car was later found in the national park. His family and friends searched for him, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. For decades, Gabriel's disappearance remained a mystery. His family gave up hope and had no idea what had happened to him. But then, 23 years later, Gabriel was found. He was living under a new identity and had no memories of his former life, except for strange flashes that he couldn't understand. He was diagnosed with dissociative amnesia, a condition in which someone loses their memory or identity and past due to severe stress or trauma. It's still unclear what Gabriel experienced during the 23 years he was missing. Some speculate that he intentionally disappeared and started a new life, while others believe he has simply forgotten his former life. What do you think the truth is? Actor Amy Hammer portrayed real-life Mike, who stepped on a mine in the desert and had to stand still for 52 hours out of fear of exploding. The film created suspense when it was revealed that 33 million mines were hidden in that desert. Mike had to fight against nature, humans, and his own faltering will and nightmares. Against all odds, he stood still enough and was eventually found and rescued. Water slides with a hatch that sinks under your feet is pretty terrifying to many people. Others actually find these to be the most fun kind of attractions out there. But what if things don't go according to plan? This happened to a boy who got into the capsule, followed the instructions, but still got stuck. He panicked a little and was cold. The door refused to open and he stood there for several minutes, but luckily they finally managed to get the door open again. Richard Louis Pronecki was an American naturalist and outdoorsman who was best known for a self-sufficient lifestyle in the wilderness of Alaska. In 1968, at the age of 51, he left his home in Iowa and moved to an area in Alaska called Twin Lakes, where he hand-built a log cabin using traditional tools and materials. Richard documented his progress through diaries and film, capturing every moment. Of course, he was discovered by both tourists and park rangers, and he immediately formed friendships with some of them. Richard's motivation to build his log cabin had stemmed from his desire for self-sufficient lifestyle in harmony with nature. He was deeply inspired by the natural beauty of Alaska and felt a strong connection to the land. He believed that leading a simpler, more sustainable life was not only better for the environment, but also more fulfilling and rewarding. However, he had to contend with harsh weather conditions, including freezing temperatures, heavy snowfall, and powerful winds, while being far away from civilization. In 1985, two British climbers set out to climb the west face of the Suella Grande in the Peruvian Andes. The climb began well as Joe Simpson and Simon Yates successfully reached the summit. But during the descent, Joe broke his leg and became stranded on a dangerous ledge and couldn't move. Simon couldn't see or hear him and thought he was dead, ultimately making the decision to cut the rope connecting them to save his own life. Joe, however, was not dead and managed to crawl down the mountain before being rescued 3 days later. The remarkable part is that Joe forgave Simon for leaving him behind. Would you have done the same? Ryan Reynolds is a popular Canadian actor who was buried alive in a wooden coffin in the 2010 film Buried. He lay there with nothing but a lighter, flashlight, and a phone. When he described the experience to David Letterman, Ryan revealed that he really had been buried there, and that there were a few moments when he passed out due to lack of oxygen and claustrophobia. The bizarre thing is that the movie is said to be based on a real story of an American truck driver named Paul Conroy. In a bizarre incident, a 29-year-old man was found trapped in a grease ventilation shaft of a Chinese restaurant. The reason why the man decided to climb onto the roof of the restaurant is still unknown, but it led to him being stuck for 2 painful days. After descending about 5 feet, or 1.5 meters, the man reached a bend in the shaft, causing him to be in a semi-crouched position with his arms immobilized above his head. Desperate and unable to move, the man began calling for help. However, his cries were muffled by the layers of rancid oil surrounding him, keeping him captive in the darkness. Fortunately, the owner of a nearby business discovered him and contacted the authorities. Rescuing the trapped man proved to be a formidable challenge for the fire department, as the sharp edges of the shaft could have caused serious injury. Additionally, he was covered in oil from head to toe, making it difficult to pull him out without sliding back down. After hours of planning, they finally succeeded in freeing him from the shaft. You've heard about Jack and Rose on the Titanic, but have you ever heard of the survival story of tennis player Dick Williams? He boarded the Titanic with 2,239 other people in 1912. When it hit the iceberg, Dick Williams jumped into the sea, swam to a half-sunk lifeboat, and spent 6 hours in the freezing water until a ship rescued him. 6 weeks later, Dick Williams won a tennis tournament, and 2 years later, his first singles title at the US Open. One of the most terrifying places you can get stuck in is cement. But how can this happen, you may think? Authorities responded to a call that a man was trapped up to his waist and chest in a cement mixer. The rescue operation took more than 2 hours to drag him out. Eventually, they attached him to a chest harness and pulled him out via a rope system and a ladder. Richard Hoagland seems like an ordinary, hard-working family man from Indianapolis. However, in the early 90s, strange behavior hinted at unseen troubles. This man, once considered energetic and friendly, began spending countless hours in solitude, causing concern for his wife, Linda. When he suddenly disappeared after reporting a fake medical emergency, his family was left anxious, bewildered, and ultimately broken. His absence also left behind a string of financial problems that the family struggled to bear. The state declared Richard dead in 2003, and Linda remarried in an attempt to move on from the past. However, in a shocking turn of events, Richard was found in 2016, having lived in Florida under the assumed identity of Terry Szymanski, a man who had died in a fishing accident. His new life included a wife, a son, and even a pilot's license. This revelation came thanks to the real Terry's nephew, who discovered the imposter while researching his family history on Ancestry.com. During his trial, Richard gave a simple explanation for his actions. He no longer wanted to be a part of his family's life. Escaping his past seemed more comfortable to him than a divorce and the obligation of child support. The legal system found him guilty of identity theft and sentenced him to only 2 years in prison, much to Linda's dismay. Ultimately, Linda sued Richard for $1.8 million in unpaid child support, emotional distress, and divorce proceedings, and she won the lawsuit. For a long time, nobody knew who this man was, but he eventually became known as the one-eyed man with a harpoon. PHINEAS Gage, as he was called, was a railroad construction foreman who lived in the mid-19th century. In 1848, he was involved in something that would change the course of medical history. He used a long iron rod called a tamping iron to pack explosive powder into a hole in a rock. The metal rod accidentally went through his skull. Miraculously, he survived, but he did suffer a brain injury. In 1988, Australian filmmaker Andrew Wright, along with 15 other people, became trapped in an underwater cave for 2 days. This was in the Penican Plains Cave after a storm caused the main entrance to collapse. This place has also been called the Mount Everest of cave diving. It's such an incredible story that it was made into a movie in 2011 called Sanctum. And unlike the characters in the movie, none of the real victims had high-tech equipment. All they had was radio communication. But luckily, they all got out safely, and the story had a happy ending. Christopher McCandless was an American adventurer and traveler who gained fame after his death in 1992. After graduating, he donated his savings to charity, abandoned all his possessions, and embarked on a journey of self-discovery across the United States. He was inspired by the works of writers like Henry David Thoreau and Jack London, who wrote about living in harmony with nature. In April 1992, Christopher set off on a remote trail in Alaska, hoping to live off the land for months. He had minimal supplies and was ill-prepared for the rugged wilderness of Alaska. He managed to survive for a few weeks, but eventually succumbed to starvation. His body was discovered by moose hunters in an abandoned bus where he had been staying. Can you imagine surviving for 28 days in the middle of the ocean? If you experienced what Adrian Vasquez experienced, you might think you were hallucinating the entire way. But he was out on a boat with 2 other friends when the motor broke down. With nobody around and no phones, the trio drifted at sea for weeks. 2 of his friends didn't make it, but Adrian was fortunate enough that it began to rain. He was found 28 days later, 620 miles or 1,000 kilometers from land, and near the Galapagos Islands. Here's another movie based on a real story. Although this one was a little more exaggerated than the others, if you ever seen the movie 12 Feet Deep, you may be familiar with the story of two sisters who got stuck under the canopy of a public swimming pool. The thriller film adds an extra element of urgency when one sister reveals she has diabetes and she needs to take her medicine. In reality, it wasn't about two sisters, but a teenage girl in Australia who couldn't get out of the pool. This is the chilling story of a man who got trapped in a narrow sewer pipe beneath the parking lot of Pulkovo International Airport in St. Petersburg. In the video, we see a man struggling and wiggling to free himself while rescue workers attempt to extract him from his confined position. According to reports, the man was trying to clean the sewer pipes when he got stuck and was subsequently pulled out of the narrow pipe shirtless. It's an event that certainly highlights the dangers of venturing into confined spaces without proper planning and equipment. The potential hazards of entering a confined space like a sewer pipe can include reduced oxygen levels, toxic substances in the air, and the risk of entrapment or asphyxiation. For those who survive, it's an experience that they'll never forget. Surprisingly, sewers also pose another well-known hazard as they can attract dangerous insects and snakes. The Miracle of the Andes is a beautiful name to hide the cruelty that took place in the Andes. This refers to the incident of a rugby team and their families who were stranded for 72 days in the Andes after a plane crash. Airplane seats were used as shelters, and they drank melted snow. When the food ran out, one of them decided to climb a mountain to find a civilization. Authorities didn't believe the story at first, until they found the rest of the team. Imagine being so terribly stuck that a firefighter got stuck next to you. Due to a misstep, a man got stuck horizontally in a mud pit. The rescue attempt did not go well at first, as one of the firefighters slipped and got stuck in the mud himself. They managed to pull him out with the ropes. The other man was also pulled out of the mud and then taken to the hospital for hypothermia. He was allowed to leave the hospital a few days later. The incredible story of Tammy's survival at sea is one that will have you amazed and inspired. She was found 41 days later on a partially destroyed ship. In 1983, Tammy embarked on a journey from Tahiti to San Diego with Richard. However, when they encountered Hurricane Raymond in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, their journey quickly turned into a fight for survival. During the storm, Tammy lost consciousness, and when she regained it, she found herself alone on the damaged yacht, far away from land. Sadly, Richard did not survive the storm. Without communication or navigation equipment, limited food and water, and an injured leg, she had to use her wits to survive. She spent 41 days alone at sea, grappling with dehydration, malnutrition, and the unforgiving elements of the open ocean. To survive, Tammy had to collect rainwater, repair ships, and navigate the yacht using only a simple chart and the stars. Miraculously, after 41 days at sea, Tammy was rescued by a passing cargo ship. Luis Zamperini was an Olympic athlete and a veteran of World War II who became famous for his incredible survival story after being lost at sea for 47 days. In 1941, he enlisted in the United States Air Force and was found at sea and taken prisoner by Japanese troops. The 2014 film Unbroken depicted a moment where Luis and his fellow prisoners were forced to carry a heaven wooden log as punishment. Despite the harrowing conditions, he survived and lived to be 97 years old. There are plenty of places in your home where you can get stuck, but being stuck in the toilet, that must be pretty frightening. Police were called by a man who said a woman named Pam Babs had been refusing to come out of the bathroom for 2 years. According to the story, she had been stuck so badly that the seat of the toilet was sticking to her skin. What a strange story, isn't it? In an attempt to break into a house in downtown Tucson, a man got stuck in the chimney, leading to a bizarre rescue operation by emergency services. Upon arrival at the scene, the fire department had to employ their problem-solving skills and figure out how to free the intruder from his precarious position. By that time, he had been stuck for hours but emerged without a scratch, straight into the arms of law enforcement. However, it remains unclear why the man decided to enter the house through the chimney, but it's certainly strange. Can you imagine someone entering your house through the chimney? What would you do in that situation? Let me know in the comments. There's a good chance you've heard about the next story from 2018 before. A youth soccer coach and his team planned to spend an hour exploring a cave. The vacation would be 2 weeks long. Just as they went underground, monsoon rains flooded the entrance, and the coach and 12 players became trapped, with nothing more than ropes and flashlights. As they waited for rescue, they drank fresh water from a stalactite. All 12 players and the coach were all eventually rescued. The case of Colleen Stan is a tragic tale of captivity that captured global attention in the late 1970s. Colleen, then 20 years old, was hitchhiking to visit a friend in Northern California when she was picked up by Cameron and Janice at a hitchhiking spot. The couple took Colleen to their home, where they kept her in a box in the basement. Over the next 16 years, Colleen was forced to live in this box, sometimes for up to 23 hours a day. During her captivity, Colleen was subjected to a series of horrific things, but eventually, the girl managed to escape thanks to Janice, who developed more sympathy for her. She took the girl to the bus station, contacted her family, and eventually returned to her home. The girl decided not to speak to the authorities for the first few months, but when Janice turned herself into the police, Cameron was eventually charged and sentenced to 104 years in prison. The only thing on Angel Hernandez's mind when she was stranded in the wilderness along the central coast of California was surviving one more day for herself and her little sister. It all began when her Jeep plunged off a cliff into the water. She woke up with head wounds and broken ribs. Angel remained on the coast for a whole week without anyone coming across her. Eventually, she was lucky enough to be found by a group of surfers. Peruvian artist Fernando created the particular piece of art he called Making Love. What happened next, however, you won't believe. 22 firefighters had been sent to rescue a young man who got stuck in this statue. However, why the boy decided to crawl into the statue in the first place is unclear. The strange disappearance and reappearance of Dr. William Horatio Bates in August 1902 is highly unusual. Dr. Bates was well known and wealthy in New York City, but one day he suddenly vanished, leaving behind his wife and a comfortable life. Shortly before his disappearance, his wife received a hurried message stating that he had to leave and would quickly return, but he never did. After several days of searching, Ms. Bates received a letter from Britain stating that a man resembling her husband had been found in a hospital in London. Despite having access to a substantial bank account, Dr. Bates claimed to have suffered hunger at various times. When Ms. Bates arrived in London, her husband didn't recognize her and had no recollection of his previous life. The woman stayed in London, hoping that her husband would regain his memory. However, 2 days after her arrival, he abruptly left the city and disappeared once again into the crowds of London. Ms. Bates never saw her husband again. She held out hope for a miracle, but ultimately passed away in 1907. Dr. Bates eventually resurfaced, though in an unexpected location. A friend recognized him and convinced him to return to New York. However, the man never regained his memories of his previous life. Riley Leon had just finished an interview at Whataburger when a tornado disrupted his journey home. He and his beloved truck were thrown over Highway 290. The tornado became known as the Joplin Tornado of 2011, which devastated the city of Joplin, Missouri, and claimed the lives of over 150 people. However, Riley survived the tornado and even received a $15,000 check in a brand new car. One of the most tragic stories of people who were trapped is that of 3 men, Clifford Olds, Luis Buddy Costin, and Ronald Endicott. They became trapped in the hull of a Navy ship, 131 feet or 40 meters below the surface of the water. According to protocol, parts of the ship were sealed so it would not capsize. For 16 days, other crew members helplessly heard the tapping for help, but could do nothing. Unfortunately, this story does not have a happy ending, as the 3 men never made it out alive. The rescue of baby Jessica on October 16, 1987 is a remarkable story that touched the hearts of people around the world. The 18-month-old girl fell into an abandoned water well while playing with other children in the backyard of the daycare. Rescue workers faced a tremendous challenge as they worked tirelessly for 58 hours to save her. Teams of rescuers and local volunteers collaborated to drill a shaft parallel to the well in which Jessica was trapped. They then had to dig horizontally through the dense rocks to connect the 2 shafts. Jessica remained conscious throughout the entire rescue operation, and her voice, cries, singing, and humming could even be heard through the microphone lowered into the well. Finally, on the evening of October 16, 1987, she was lifted out of the well. The girl was covered in dirt, but the most important thing is that she was well and alive. People around the world breathed a sigh of relief. In 2011, it was reported that Jessica gained access to a trust fund of at least $800,000, established after her rescue and made up of donations from people around the world. If you've seen the movie 127 Hours from 2010, you might know this story. The lead role in the film was played by James Franco. The story is about Aaron who was canyoning, an activity in which you follow a river that runs through a gorge. Aaron did this alone and got stuck between a falling 880-pound or 400-kilogram rock and the cliff. His passion was to climb all the mountains in Colorado, including the 14er, which is 4,600 yards or 4,200 meters high. What he brought with him were ropes, a liter of water, pieces of chocolate, headphones, and a video camera. There was no reception at the location where he was, and he hadn't told anyone where he was going. He was stuck for days, but found a way to save himself by leaving a part of his forearm behind. Eventually, he was found by a Dutch family who helped him and alerted the emergency services. Carl Akeley is considered the father of modern taxidermy. Taxidermy is when you engage in preparing or stuffing animals. However, Carl has one of the most astounding stories of all time. During his expedition to Africa in 1896, in what is now Somalia, he saw movement in a nearby thicket at night. Out of nowhere, a leopard charged him. Carl was firmly grasped, but he refused to give up. He fought back with his bare hands against the leopard that eventually let him go. In shock, Carl made his way back to camp where his colleagues took care of him. Fortunately, Carl survived and continued his work, but with a new respect for the dangers of African wilderness. Janelle Guzman McMillan became known as the last survivor of 9/11 and was buried under rubble for over a day and couldn't call for help for a total of 27 hours. After days of intensive searching, rescue workers found the woman and immediately took her to the hospital, where she recovered. Her incredible story was eventually made into a film. Aaron Ralston's story was filmed and played by James Franco. This event shows how far people will go to survive. Aaron had begun an 8-hour hike in Blue John Canyon in Utah, USA. A misstep caused him to dislodge a rock weighing about 800 pounds or 363 kilograms, trapping his hand and forearm. With dwindling supplies, he lasted 5 days and eventually found a way to free himself, but had to leave his forearm behind. Ho Van Thon and his son fled into the dense Vietnamese jungle in 1972 after his wife and 2 other children lost their lives. For over 4 decades, they lived in seclusion, relying entirely on the natural resources of the wilderness to survive. Without any contact with the outside world, Thon and his son became skilled hunters and gatherers, making their own tools and weapons. Their shelter was a hut made of bamboo and leaves, camouflaged to blend in with the natural surroundings. They continued to live this way, deeply hidden in the jungle until 2013, when they were discovered by a team of villagers searching for firewood. The 2 were emaciated, barefoot, and covered in mosquito bites when they were finally found. The news of their discovery generated a wave of media attention, and the Vietnamese government acted swiftly. They brought Thon and his son to the hospital for medical care, and then returned them to their village. Despite the attention they received, Thon and his son remained out of the spotlight. All they wanted was to return to their hut in the jungle. Have you ever been in an impossible place, or have you ever gotten lost? Let me know in the comments. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos we made, click one on the screen or take a look at the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.